At Thanksgiving, Dad announced. Only real successes sit at this table. Then the CEO pulled out the chair beside me. For a second, I thought he'd misheard. He'd paused in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, taking in the scene, my dad at the head of the table with his carved turkey and his smug little audience, my mom fluttering around with extra napkins, my brother, Adam, already halfway through his first beer. Then he smiled, this small, polite, knowing smile. Walked in like he belonged there, and dragged the empty chair right next to me across the hardwood floor, the scrape so loud it sliced straight through the fake laughter at the table. My dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Adam actually choked on his drink. I was still holding a basket of rolls, frozen, while my boss, my CEO, patted the back of the chair beside me and said, "Hope this seat's not taken. I hear this is where the real talent sits." My fingers tightened around the woven handle until the wicker cut little grooves into my skin. The room suddenly felt too bright, like someone had dialed up the contrast. I could smell the rosemary on the turkey, the buttery sweetness from the yams, the faint hint of my dad's aftershave that always reminds me of middle school recitals. My brain was firing off useless thoughts. Did I vacuum properly? Is there cat hair on the chair? Why is he here? Why is he here? Why is he here? I set the roll basket down with more care than necessary because my hands were trembling. No, it's hi. I managed, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. Across the table, Dad's expression tried and failed to rearrange itself into something that wasn't sheer confusion. It was a Thursday, obviously, Thanksgiving. But more importantly, it was the first Thanksgiving in 5 years that I'd agreed to spend at my parents' house instead of working late, or claiming some vague Friendsgiving I didn't actually have. I'm 30F, my dad is 63, and we have one of those relationships where you can tell he loves me in theory, in that abstract. I'd jump in front of a bus for you. But in practice, he mostly treats me like a long-term development project that keeps underperforming. My older brother, Adam 34M, is the benchmark. Married at 26, 3 kids, bought a house with a 2-car garage, has senior in his job title at some consulting firm. I, meanwhile, took a messier route, communications degree, a patchwork of internships and contract gigs, a few very public career failures, and then, quietly, a job at a growing tech company that my family never really bothered to understand. The thing about my dad is, he has this obsession with success that lives in his bones. He grew up poor, like sharing a room with 3 brothers poor, and pulled himself up through the ranks of a logistics company until he could buy a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs and a new truck every 5 years. In his mind, that's what success looks like: titles, property, visible progress. Anything outside that template is suspicious at best. When I was a teenager and said I wanted to be a writer, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "That's a nice hobby, kiddo. But you need something solid to fall back on." Spoiler, I never got the solid job he meant. I bounced. I worked part-time at a bookstore, did social media for a local cafe, wrote blog posts for small businesses for $30 a pop. I freelanced for an online mag that paid in exposure. I burned out at 26 and ended up back in my childhood bedroom for 6 months, curtains drawn, the weight of my dad's disappointment heavier than the actual gravity of Earth. He never yelled. That almost made it worse. He'd just make comments. "Still sleeping past 9? Must be nice. When I was your age, I was already managing 6 guys in the warehouse. Adam's talking about putting the kids in private school. You see, that's what planning looks like." He'd drop those lines casually, usually while the TV was blaring or while he was carving meat or flipping through the mail, like they were just facts about the weather. But they lodged in my chest like little barbs. When I finally moved out again, landed a decent entry-level job in the marketing team of a mid-sized tech company, he nodded and said, "Good. Office job. Benefits. Now stick with it. No more hopping around." Like the previous few years had been a phase I could just grow out of. The company, Arclight, started as a small startup making project management software. By the time I joined, it had grown out of that fragile, will we survive stage and into a real, if chaotic, business. The kind where you have an HR department and an actual coffee machine, not just instant sachets in a mug that says world's okayest CEO. I was hired as content coordinator, which Dad translated to, you write tweets? And never really updated. What I actually did, as time went on, was more muddled. I wrote blog posts, case studies, long-winded email campaigns, crisis replies when a feature went down and users were angry, slide decks for investor pitches, scripts for product videos. I became the person people slacked at 9:30 p.m. like, hey, can you word this better? It was stressful and messy and often underappreciated, but I was good at it. I didn't say that out loud, because in my family that would sound like bragging, and bragging is only okay if you're talking about promotions and house prices. Quiet, weird skills like making a landing page sound human don't register. The CEO, Ethan, was one of those guys you assume is going to be a jerk until you meet him. Early 40s, jeans and sneakers, more comfortable in a hoodie than a suit, always half distracted, brain turned up to 11. The first time I met him properly, he'd wandered into the marketing pod, pointed at my screen, and said, "Oh, you wrote that launch email. My mom forwarded it to me and said, this almost made me understand what you do. So you have a fan." Then he'd walked away before I could even process that my work had been part of a conversation between him and his mom. He wasn't warm, exactly. He didn't do small talk, but he noticed things. If you pulled a long week, he'd send a 2-line email. Saw the hours you put in. Appreciate it. Go home. When the company had to do layoffs during COVID, he cried in the all hands. Not performative, not a single manly tear. Full on couldn't get through the speech. Over 3 years I went from the girl who writes emails to something like his shadow when it came to communication. He'd ping me before investor calls. Can you bullet the main narrative? He'd send me rough brain dumps at midnight that looked like paranoid word salad and ask me to turn them into something the board wouldn't panic over. My job title changed to Communications Manager, and my salary finally reached a number that made living alone possible. None of that registered at home. Still at that computer place? Dad would ask. Still at the tech company. I'd correct. As long as they're paying you on time, he'd say. Though I still think government jobs are safer. In his world, CEOs were cartoon villains in suits. Startups were flaky. Marketing was fluff. Real success was something you could point to on a business card and have everyone nod in approval. So when Ethan sent an email in early November with the subject line, "Quick personal question," my first thought was that I'd accidentally violated some obscure NDA, and my second thought was that he wanted me to ghostwrite a speech. What he actually wrote was, "Hey, weird ask, feel free to say no, but do you have any plans for Thanksgiving? My parents are flying out here this year. My mom is insisting they get to see how my employees live." Her words. I do not want to invite myself to anyone's family thing, but we got talking about how holidays can be complicated for people and, long story. If you're already committed, absolutely no pressure. If you aren't and happen to be doing something low-key, would you consider adding 3 more chairs? I'll bring pie and wine and promise to help with dishes. Ethan. I stared at the email for a long time, rereading phrases like, "Holidays can be complicated," and "no pressure," while my brain spun in circles. Normally, I would have lied. I would have said, "Oh, I'm traveling," or "My family has a big thing already planned," and then spent the day alone in my apartment, microwaving Trader Joe's mac and cheese, watching people I follow online post photos of their elaborate tables. This year, though, Mom had been on a campaign. "You have to come," she'd said on the phone. "Your brother's bringing the kids. I'm doing the full spread. Your father's invited some people from his old work. It'll be nice. We miss you." What she meant underneath, "We miss you," was, Your dad's been making comments about you never coming and I'm tired of defending you. I'd caved. Okay, I'd said. I'll come. Just please, no speeches about my life choices. I can't control your father's mouth. She'd sigh. But I'll try. So I was already locked in. The idea of showing up with Ethan and his parents felt insane. Like crossing the streams of two universes that were never meant to overlap. Arclight me and family me were different species. At work, I could be competent and sarcastic and occasionally push back on a bad idea. At home, I was perpetually 19, the kid who dropped her econ class and cried about it. I almost typed, "Sorry, I'm already going to my parents," and hit send. But then my fingers hovered. Holidays can be complicated, he'd written. That line stuck. I thought about his mom wanting to see how my employees live. And for some reason my brain produced an image of a woman like my own mom, proud but nosy, wanting to connect the dots between the company her son ran and the actual humans inside it. I thought about how at Arclight, we talked a lot about bringing your whole self to work, and then all went home and pretended our whole selves were uncomplicated. On a stupid, impulsive whim, I wrote back. Already committed to my parents' place, but I could ask if they're okay with extra guests? They live about 40 minutes out of the city, old-school suburban Thanksgiving. If that's not too weird. He replied within 5 minutes. That would be amazing if you're comfortable asking. If not, all good. Also, fair warning, my mom will probably bring Tupperware, for leftovers, and then attempt to wash every dish in the house. I laughed out loud at my desk. Then I called my mom. Hey, I said. Hypothetical question. How would you feel if I brought guests for Thanksgiving? There was a rustle on the other end, like she was shifting the phone between ear and shoulder while doing something with her other hand. What kind of guests? She asked, wary. Like a boyfriend? I choked. Definitely not, I said. My boss. And his parents. They're flying in. They don't really have anywhere to go. A beat. Your boss, she repeated. From the computer place. From Arclight, I said. He's nice. His mom wants to see how his employees live. There was a moment where I could feel her brain whirring. My mom's love language is hosting. She doesn't feel useful unless she's feeding someone. The idea of the boss, seeing her table probably hit some deep pride button. Well, she said, drawing it out, we'd have to get another turkey. And I'd need to add another leaf to the table. And your father will fuss. But yes. Yes. Of course. Tell them they're welcome. Tell them your mother knows how to do Thanksgiving properly. Thanks, Mom, I said, relief washing through me. I'll let him know. Dad was less enthusiastic. The CEO? He'd said later, when Mom told him. Of that startup. Of her company. Mom corrected. It'll be good. Maybe he can tell her if this place is stable. You never listen to me. Dad grunted. As long as he's not vegan. So that was that. In the weeks leading up, the whole thing took on a surreal quality. Ethan was casual about it at work. Don't stress, he said. My parents are chill. They're Midwestern. They'll probably try to adopt your whole family by dessert. You say don't stress like I'm not bringing my worlds into direct collision. I muttered. He raised an eyebrow. If you change your mind, say the word. I'll tell my mom we're doing a restaurant. But I didn't. Some morbid curiosity pulled me forward. I wanted to see what would happen if my dad had to talk to someone who actually understood what I did, not just at job title level, but at I've watched her keep our investors from panicking with a well-timed email level. Cut to Thanksgiving Day. I got to my parents' house early to help, which mostly meant being handed things to carry while Mom darted around like a general on a battlefield. The house smelled like turkey and nutmeg and the faint lemon of the cleaning spray she uses on everything. The good tablecloth was on. The nice plates that only come out on holidays were stacked neatly by the sink. Don't let the children touch the crystal, she said, pointing at the wine glasses. Last year your niece almost decapitated one. Dad was already in his hosting outfit, jeans, belt, button-up shirt tucked in, socks but no shoes. The TV in the living room was on the game at a volume just below deafening, because apparently silence makes him uncomfortable. Adam arrived with his wife and 3 kids in a flurry of coats and noise. My nieces and nephew ran straight to the backyard. Adam walked into the kitchen, cracked a beer, and said, "So this is the day we meet the famous CO, huh?" In the same tone you'd use for, "So this is the day the aliens land." "Be nice," Mom said. "He's a guest." Dad snorted. "We'll see if he's a real CO or just one of those app boys," he said. I should have taken that as a warning. By the time Ethan texted, "Here," 10 minutes early, because of course we'd reached the part of the afternoon where Dad starts doing performance banter. The turkey was out of the oven. People were milling around with drinks. Adam was bragging about some client he'd landed. I opened the door before Dad could. Ethan stood there in a navy sweater and dark jeans, holding a pie in one hand and a bottle of wine cradled in the crook of his arm. Behind him were his parents, both a little shorter than I'd expected, his mom with a foil-covered casserole, his dad with a 6-pack of something craft-looking. "Hi," Ethan said, suddenly a bit shy in a way I'd never seen at work. "We brought offerings." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "You've already won points with my mom." Mom appeared like I'd summoned her. "You must be Ethan!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on a dish towel before shaking his. "And these are your parents? I'm so glad you could come. Shoes off, please, we're a no-shoes house." They all obediently bent to remove their shoes. Ethan's socks had tiny cartoon rockets on them. For some reason, that made me feel less like I was about to introduce a lion into a petting zoo. Introductions swirled together in my memory now. "Mom, Dad, this is my boss, Ethan, and his parents, Mark and Linda. Please call me Linda. Mrs. Clark makes me feel like I'm about to scold someone. Oh, pie. You didn't have to. Oh, pecan, my favorite. Wow, you've got a nice backyard. Those lemon trees?" Adam hovering in the background, watching, beer in hand, eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed whether Ethan seemed like his kind of guy. We made it through the appetizer phase relatively unscathed. Linda and Mom bonded over recipes within 10 minutes. Ethan's dad, Mark, and my dad did the cautious male dance of asking each other about work. "You run the company?" Dad asked, carving a slice of cheese. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Started it with a couple of friends about 10 years ago. We build project management tools for distributed teams." Dad's eyes glazed slightly at that. "So, computers," he said. "Software," Ethan said. "But sure, also computers. What about manufacturing?" Dad asked. "You ever think of branching into something physical? Real asset?" Not our space," Ethan said, unoffended. "But we help companies that make physical things keep track of their work. The boring bits that make the actual building possible." Dad nodded like he didn't get it but was too polite to say so. "At least you're the one doing the hiring and firing, eh?" he said. "Unfortunately," Ethan said dryly. "Comes with the job." It was going fine. Awkward, but fine. Then we sat down to eat. My mom had laid the table like a magazine spread, napkins folded, candles lit, turkey in the center. Dad stood at the head, carving knife in hand, because he loves a captive audience. This is his stage. We all found our seats. Mom at the other end, kids scattered along the sides, me somewhere in the middle. The chair beside me was empty, because Ethan was still helping Mom bring something in from the kitchen. Dad cleared his throat. You could almost hear the capital letters when he spoke. "All right," he said. "Before we dig in, I just want to say how grateful I am to have everyone here. Family, friends, successes." He swept his gaze slowly around the table, lingering on Adam, then back to me. His mouth curled in that half-smile he probably thought was playful. Only real successes sit at this table, he added, with a little chuckle that didn't quite land. There were a few polite laughs. My stomach clenched. The words hit me like a physical tap to the chest. I felt my face go hot, my shoulders tightening. He'd said similar things my whole life, little jabs wrapped in jokes, but saying it in front of my boss felt like being stripped in public. It was like he'd managed to condense years of "Adam is the successful one, you're still proving yourself," into one sentence. And that's the exact second Ethan walked in. He took in the table, the turkey, my dad with his carving knife midair, me frozen with the rolls. Then he moved, pulled out the empty chair beside me, and the rest is that second paragraph. My dad blinked, thrown. "You must be Ethan," he said, recovering. "I'm Mr. Parker," Ethan said, extending a hand over my plate. "Good to finally put a face to the stories." "Oh," Dad said, shaking it. "Hope they weren't all bad." Ethan smiled, glancing at me briefly. "Depends on your definition of bad," he said lightly. "Mostly I hear about how hard your daughter works." I wanted to crawl under the table. The rest of the meal was a blur in some ways and painfully sharp in others. Conversation fractured and overlapped. The kids argued about who got the drumsticks. Linda asked for my yam recipe. Ethan complimented the stuffing. At some point, Adam leaned forward. "So, Ethan," he said, "how big is your company now?" Ethan chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth. "About 180 people full-time," he said. "Plus contractors." Adam let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said. "And you've got, what, like, offices everywhere?" "Main office here, one in Austin, one in Berlin," Ethan said. "And a bunch of remote folks." Dad perked up. "So you'd be, what's the title? Chief Executive something?" "Officer," Ethan said. "COE, yeah?" Dad nodded slowly. "Big responsibility," he said. "Lot of pressure, running the show? Making sure people have jobs?" "Definitely," Ethan said. "Keeps me up at night sometimes." "That's real success," Dad said, almost to himself. "Building something. Creating opportunities." He looked right past me when he said it. I felt my grip tighten around my fork. Something sour bubbled up in my chest, not just anger, but this raw, exhausted hurt. I'd been at ArcLight 3 years longer than most people last in tech. I'd written our crisis comms during a data breach. I'd stayed late to help junior staff practice for presentations because they were terrified. I'd been given a retention bonus last quarter because Ethan didn't want me poached by another company. And yet, in my dad's eyes, my proximity to real success started and ended with sitting next to the CEO at Thanksgiving. I must have been quieter than usual because Linda turned to me at one point and said, "Ethan tells us you're his right hand when it comes to words." I almost choked on my water. "He said that?" "Oh yeah," she said, smiling. "He said if I had to choose between losing Wi-Fi and losing Emma, I'd choose Wi-Fi. She fixes my mouth." Heat crawled up my neck, but this time it wasn't shame. It was something like being seen. "He exaggerates," I said automatically. "Not really," Ethan cut in, spearing a piece of turkey. "I'm decent at talking off the cuff, but your daughter is the one who makes us sound like we know what we're doing on paper." He turned to my dad. "You know all those investor updates and customer letters with my name on them? She writes most of the first drafts. I just scribble on the margins." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. No one at the table knew I ghostwrote anything, let alone that. Dad frowned, clearly thrown by the idea that I was, in some way, important to this man's job. "She writes emails," he said, slow, like he was testing the words. "Emails, speeches, press statements, crisis comms," Ethan said. "Last month when we had that outage? The reason our users didn't completely revolt is because Emma managed to explain what went wrong without making us sound incompetent. That's a skill." Mom blinked rapidly, looking between us. "I knew you did writing," she said. You never told us it was all that. I shrugged, suddenly very interested in the pattern of gravy on my plate. Doesn't come up, I muttered. Ethan, either oblivious to the undercurrent or deliberately ignoring it, kept going. Honestly, if you want to talk about real successes, he said lightly, I'd put surviving 4 rebrands, a global pandemic, and 2 rounds of layoffs without losing your soul pretty high on the list. Dad chuckled, but there was an edge now. Well, it's different, isn't it? He said. Someone has to steer the ship. Vision, leadership. That's impressive. He jerked his chin at Ethan. No offense, Emma, but not everyone can be the boss. I knew that tone. That. Don't get ideas above your station. Tone. My jaw tightened. Ethan glanced at me. I could see him doing quick mental math. Decide how honest to be. Decide whether to step over a line. I mean, he said slowly, that's true. Not everyone wants to be the boss. Or should be. It's a specific kind of hell, he added, half joking. But I also wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't have people like Emma around. I'm good at certain things. There are whole areas where she's better. We make each other look smarter than we are. Adam made a low teasing sound. Careful, man, my sister's ego is going to explode. He grinned. I forced a laugh I didn't feel. Relax, I said. I still rent a 1-bedroom. I'm not about to buy a yacht. Nothing wrong with renting, Ethan said. I rent too. Dad's head whipped around. You rent? Yeah, Ethan said, unbothered. I've got options, obviously, but I move too much. Throwing millions at a house I barely see doesn't make sense for me. I'd rather invest in the company. Dad looked genuinely disoriented. In his head, CEO equals mansion. The conversation moved on, in part because the kids began a loud argument about who got to break the wishbone. But that sentence, only real successes sit at this table, kept echoing in my head, rubbing raw spots against every word that followed. At some point, Mom shooed the kids outside, and the adults lingered over dessert. Pumpkin pie, pecan pie, coffee. The tryptophan haze settled in. That's when Ethan did something that blew whatever was left of my dad's neat narrative. So, I hope this isn't too weird at a family dinner, he said, setting his fork down. But since we're all here, and you clearly care about what your daughter does. My stomach dropped. I had a split second to think, oh God, please don't fire me in front of my parents. Ethan smiled, a little nervously. We've been talking internally about expanding our executive team, he said. There's a gap between what I do and what our VP of product does when it comes to how we talk to the outside world, press, investors, partners. For the last year, Emma's effectively been doing that work without the title. My heartbeat roared in my ears. My mom put a hand to her chest. Dad squinted, as if this were a pitch he hadn't agreed to hear. So, Ethan continued, assuming she says yes. We still have to, do the HR paperwork and all that, but I wanted you to hear it from me. We're offering her director of communications. It's a big step up. Salary, equity, the works. She's earned it. Everything went very, very still. My fork clinked against the plate because my hand had dropped. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, uninvited. Are you serious? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled. Yeah, he said. I had this whole formal offer planned for next week, but then when you invited us here, I thought, it might be nice for your family to see what I see. He looked at my parents. Sorry if that's too forward. We can pretend I didn't say anything and do it properly on Monday if this is awkward. Mom's eyes were already shiny. No, she said quickly. This is wonderful. She turned to me as if seeing me for the first time in years. Director, she repeated, tasting the word. Our girl, the director. Dad's face did this complicated thing I've never fully seen before. Pride, confusion, a hint of resentment maybe. His daughter being called director by a CEO at his own table scrambled his hierarchy. That's a big role, he said slowly. You sure she's ready? I wanted to sink into the floor. Ethan didn't miss a beat. I wouldn't be offering it if I wasn't, he said. Honestly, she's been operating at that level for a while. This is just us catching up. Adam let out a low whistle. Damn, Em, he said, slightly stunned. Equity? You gonna be rich and forget about us when your company goes public? I laughed, a shaky sound, grateful for the break in tension. Pretty sure I'm still the designated babysitter, I said. My hands were trembling under the table. I pressed my palms against my thighs, grounding myself in the scratch of denim. For years, I'd dreamed of someone credible looking my father in the eye and saying, she's not a screw-up. She's good at something that matters. I just never pictured it happening over pie. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, dreamlike way. Mom pulled out a bottle of fancy wine she'd been saving. Linda hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, Don't let him undersell you on the equity. Your brain is worth a lot. Ethan pretended not to hear but smirked. Dad oscillated between grilling Ethan about the business. What's your revenue? What's your plan if the market tanks? And saying things like, Well, our Emma always did have a way with words. As if he'd known all along. At one point, when I was stacking plates by the sink, he came up beside me, drying a dish in his hands, and said, not quite looking at me, Director, huh? Apparently, I said. He nodded, lips pressed together. Guess I should stop telling people you do something with computers, he said, attempting a joke. Wouldn't hurt, I said. He cleared his throat. I didn't mean anything by that thing earlier, he said too casually. About the table. Just, you know me. Mouth runs faster than my brain. I set a plate down a little harder than necessary. You absolutely meant something by it, I said. You always have. You've been measuring real success in a very specific way since I was 15. It's just the first time you said it out loud in front of someone who doesn't share your definition. He winced. That's not. I mean, I'm proud of you, he said. I just worry. These tech things, they come and go. I've seen companies rise and fall. I worry too, I said. That's why I work so hard at it. I took a breath. But your version of worrying has felt a lot like believing I'm behind. Or less than. Compared to Adam. He opened his mouth, then shut it. His shoulders sagged a little. I never meant to make you feel that way, he said. I know, I said. But you did. We stood there in the clatter and steam of the kitchen, the muffled sounds of the game and conversation behind us, for a long moment. Finally, he said gruffly, Well, Director Emma. The name awkward and new in his mouth. Don't let it go to your head. I rolled my eyes, but there was less sting in it now. Too late, I said. I'm already planning my villain arc. He snorted. You get stock options with that? Yeah, I said. Little ones. But they could add up. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. Have something that's yours. On the drive home later, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Sorry if that was over the top. Just saw an opening and took it. Your dad needed data. I stared at it, then typed back. It was terrifying. And kind of the nicest thing anyone's done for me. Also, now my mom is going to bring up, Director, at every holiday until I die. He replied with a string of crying laughing emojis and occupational hazard. It's been a few weeks since then. I signed the official paperwork, got the new title on my email signature. I had an actual grown-up conversation with HR about comp. We're working on a long-term comms strategy that I get to shape instead of just execute. At home, the narrative has shifted in small but noticeable ways. Mom tells relatives, Emma's a director at a tech company now, with the same tone she used when Adam bought his house. She still doesn't fully understand what I do, but the word, director, is concrete enough to satisfy her. Dad is trying. He'll still say things like, You sure this isn't all going to vanish in a puff of smoke? But they're less loaded now, less like accusations. He asks questions. What does a director of communications actually do? And when I explain, he listens longer before his eyes glaze over. He hasn't made another real success speech. The part that sticks with me, weirdly, isn't even the promotion itself. It's that moment when the CEO pulled out the chair beside me, looked my father in the eye after that comment, and essentially said, without saying it, your metrics are outdated. Your daughter is more than your disappointment. I know not everyone gets that kind of external validation. I know plenty of people grinding in, invisible, jobs with no Ethan to swoop in at Thanksgiving and translate their worth into a language their parents respect. It shouldn't take a CEO to make your dad see you. But in my messy, human, not very enlightened heart, I'm still a little grateful it did. At Thanksgiving, Dad announced, only real successes sit at this table. Then the CEO pulled out the chair beside me. I've been replaying that line in my head, rewriting it for myself. Only real successes sit at this table. Only real successes show up anyway, even when they know they're going to be measured and found wanting. Only real successes keep going after false starts and failures and moving back home. Only real successes learn how to write words that keep a company afloat, even if their own family thinks she does something with emails. Only real successes figure out, eventually, that maybe the only definition of success that really matters is the one where you nod at yourself in the bathroom mirror and think, I'm okay with who I'm becoming, whether or not your dad ever understands what a director of communications actually does.